Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming today. My name is Michelle Romer-Shun. I'm the events manager here at Princeton Innovation Center Biolabs. And we have a wonderful panel discussion for you tonight. I'm sure you'll find it interesting and informative. If you aren't familiar with us, Princeton Biolabs was founded in 2018 by Princeton University, and it's managed by Biolabs. It is a premier co-working space for early stage technology and life sciences startups in New Jersey. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started for those in attendance. Our guest Wi-Fi is Biolabs guest, and the password is welcome1, all one word with a capital W. And if you need to know where the bathrooms are, they're located down the hall to the left. The women's room is the first left, and the men's is the second. And now I am going to hand the mic over to Anne-Marie Maman, Executive Director of the Princeton Entrepreneurship Council at Princeton University.
Thanks, Beth. Thanks, everybody, for coming. This is the first of what we're envisioning to be a 4-part series. We are really looking for a practical discussion about what really do you do. So it's not going to be a theoretical, there's going to be a little bit of that, but we're really looking for a conversation about what happens, how do you do it? And although our panelists, our speakers, are mostly in the life sciences or all in the life sciences, a lot of this will be broadly based. So their experiences in the life sciences, they all have experience outside of life sciences also, but so what we'll talk about will be life sciences based, but take it for across the boards. I will let each of you introduce yourself. We have 3 panelists. Why don't we start with Mike? Yeah, you have to turn your thing on. Here, I don't think so. There you go. Yeah. There you go.
Okay, can you hear me? So good evening here in New Jersey. It's probably good afternoon or morning, depending on where the Zoom folks are coming in from. I'm Mike Wiley. I have been providing financing to or investing in startup companies for around 16 years now, across, to Anne-Marie's point, multiple domains: life sciences, high tech, and clean tech. I'm currently the vice president at the New Jersey Health Foundation and Foundation Venture Capital Group. And across our affiliated entities, we provide funding for early basic research, community health projects, and early stage commercialization projects. That's through the Foundation for Health Advancement and the New Jersey Health Foundation. And then through Foundation Venture Capital Group, we provide seed funding to startup companies that are or have a nexus with a select group of affiliate partners, partner institutions. Those partners include Cooper University Healthcare, Hackensack Meridian Health, the Kessler Foundation, New Jersey Institute of Technology, Princeton University, Rowan University, Rutgers University, and Stevens Institute of Technology. KayoThera was actually one of the startup companies that we funded. It was a spin out of Princeton University, and looking forward to hearing Mark's comments. As Anne-Marie said, I think he's going to have a lot of practical insight, and I'll hand it over maybe to Mark.
Yeah, perfect.
Thanks, Mike. So Mark Esposito, I did my PhD at Princeton, started back in 2011. I was working out of Yip Kang's lab, doing work in molecular biology, genetics, and cancer immunology. Up until about 2017, I got to meet Mike, Tony, Anne-Marie, and a couple of the other entrepreneurial people that were sort of intermeshed with the Princeton ecosystem. And at the same time, some of my own research had sort of spun out an area of biology that was very interesting, that I thought had good commercial appeal, and that would be something that was a venturable idea that we could then spin out. So worked with Mike to spin out KayoThera in 2019. That was about 3 years after we'd started to generate some IP, and then actually set up a lot of the systems inside the university that was at first academic, and then it became more and more commercially focused as we spun out. I served as the founding CEO scientist of KayoThera, brought in an integrated drug development program by working with both physical assets in New Jersey and across the US, as well as outsourcing a lot of our R&D to CRO partners in Asia, in Europe, and then also here in the US. Last year, we closed on a Series A investment led by Merika and her team. So I transitioned over to head of research at KayoThera. I'm also working as a mentor to a couple of Princeton University founders and then founders here in the Washington area. And one of the companies, you might have seen me around biolabs, I helped Optimios with some of their in vivo, ex vivo work, and then CRO outsourcing as well. And I'm still working with that group. And so I'll pass that over to Merika.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, everyone. I'm Merika Koday. I'm a principal with Accelerator Life Science Partners. We're an early stage life science venture capital firm that invests in therapeutics. We look to partner with universities to help spin out technologies. We will help the teams kind of develop the technology, and then we will invest in them. And then we also provide management for those companies after we've invested. So we do seed and Series A, and as Mark mentioned, KayoThera is one of our portfolio companies as well. And, brief background on me, I also spun out a company out of my graduate work. So I've been in a similar position, kind of on the entrepreneur side, helping to spin out a company and kind of the early stages. So this is pretty relevant and looking forward to the panel.
I'm going to dig right into it if I can. I've got a whole list of questions. We're going to do about 35 minutes of questions that we've talked about ahead of time, and then go into audience questions. So first of all, how do I know if I'm ready to seek outside funding? And what kind of funding should that be? So what do I need to think about if I'm thinking I've got a startup, what do I do next? Who wants to kick it off?
Yeah, I can start out with that one at a very high level. And that is, for us, it was sort of very clear at the two different junctures when KayoThera raised fundings. In both cases, it was because a large infusion of capital would actually really lead to a commensurate amount of IP that we generated and R&D activities that we did. So there's a certain amount that you can do with grant funding early on. You can validate an idea. And if you're still working with your hands a lot and need to internally develop, that's a time where you're not raising funding yet. But once you hit a juncture either where your bandwidth is fully capped or bringing in 3 to 4 more scientists or even outsourcing a lot of your R&D would drive huge increases in value in short amounts of time, you want to then start looking for that financing. Like if you think about your value of the company, you have both a numerator and a denominator, and your denominator is always time, right? So you're losing value if you're not capitalizing on that time. So you want that infusion of capital to make that denominator as small as you can, even if it means dilution or the other things that many founders, are traditionally scared of up front.
Want to put some thoughts in?
Yeah, I'll throw in there just to back up to trying to carry this forward comments that Anne-Marie made. I think the first thing is to just determine where you are, what domain, and is there a possibility you could even bootstrap and avoid? I mean, I think we're going to focus a lot on venture capital fundraising, but we're trying to look at the audience broadly here, and maybe there is a chance that you're in another domain where you have the chance to bootstrap the company or grow it organically, and you can avoid raising dilutive capital. And if you still need capital, go to non-dilutive sources like government grants or foundations, other nonprofits. So I think the first step is to really kind of understand what domain you're in, what your capital needs are, and what those sources of capital could be. And then if you determine, oh, in fact, I'm going to need, venture capital, and I think the points that Mark has already raised and that we'll get into will be, more relevant. But, first, establish what domain am I operating in, what are my capital needs, and what are all the sources of capital I might be able to access.
And I think too, just to add to that, I think, taking a step back, there's always that question of like, do I need to create this company? And you should have a resounding yes for that. And you should have a really good idea of what makes you special and different than everything else out there. And so if you don't have a good knowledge of your competition and what the landscape looks like, then you really need to dig in and figure that out first, because any VC is going to ask you, we always ask, like, what's the secret sauce? What is the thing that you can do that no one else can, and why I should back you? And so you should think long and hard about that and have a great answer for it before you start anything else.
And that's going to come through a lot of conversations. You're not going to find that out by sitting at your desk at your computer looking online. You have to go out and talk to people, not 5 people, a lot of people, all kinds of different people, and you'll learn and learn and learn. That should be ongoing through the whole company. So let's say I do decide that I want to raise funds. What should I do first? So I've decided, okay, I am going to need to raise $2 million, let's say. What do I do?
Mark, what was the first thing you did?
Yeah, there's a billion things that happen all in parallel. The very first thing that I did was I put together a deck that, what I thought was the best idea to go forward with, and then bounced that off of friendly, sort of quasi-investors or people that were near to the investment community. I benefited from having a few friends that were, pretty deep in the venture community, and then bounced that off and then broke down the deck, broke down the narrative for the story 3 to 4 times before we finally got to one that stuck, right? Because what you initially think, I think as a founder of what the market need is and what VC or what angels will want to hear is very, very different from what actually sticks and lands. So like Anne-Marie said, it's an iterative process. You have to jump right into it rather than doing a lot of reading or figuring out what's worked for other people. You want to make a program that rhymes with other successful stories, right? That all the elements need to be there, but at the same time, you need to iterate over and over again. So build a deck, build a small sample of what you would move to after you get a yes on the first meeting, and then also have an idea of what a third meeting would look like as well. And what you're going to do is you're going to iterate on that first non-con deck or that non-con pitch, take it to a couple of low stakes pitch events, see what your reception is like, see what people don't like about it, break it down, go back, do it again. And in our case, the pivot wasn't about the technology per se. It was just about, what patients we were going after, what our clinical development plan was going to look like, and all these sort of peripherals. So it was really easy to change that to make it more investor friendly, right? I think one of the big things that you want to be concerned about is going out to the people you're most interested in raising money with a very incomplete or like young type of pitch, because what you're going to do is you're going to immediately cool those people off, and the second meeting is going to be so much harder. So iterate where it doesn't matter that much, and then once you think you have a good product for your first and second meeting, to get people really warmed up to you, that's the time to really hit the road hard.
So what about, Mark, some of the practical things like, incorporating the company, hiring a lawyer, things like that? When did you do that?
Yeah, we benefited from having a lot of guidance from the university and with NJHF on the actual spin out. So I'd say those things are important. The most important thing overall is going to be your IP. That's what you sell the company on. And so it's making sure that you have the right IP group, an IP group that is filed in areas in your domain before, and that they have done a preliminary freedom to operate so that you aren't going out and somebody's going to be like, hey, what about this company? You can't do this because of that company. So it's getting in front of the IP question, making sure you have good coverage on that, making sure you have an IP lawyer that you would be able to give your baby or your dog to, and they'd watch them overnight. That's how much you need to trust them. And it all kind of flows out from there. Then you build the team of experts that you're going to bounce things off of. They should be industry veterans and ones who have operational experience in the financing in the space that you need. It's great to have an awesome scientific advisory or clinical advisory or technological advisory board full of head honchos. But it's that early operational advice that you need. So I'd say it goes IP, your team of industry experts that you're going to be able to iterate against. And then it's going to be actually building the technology that you have. So it's going to be data audits, collecting things, making sure that your science is really fantastic. It's repeatable, that you can send it out to somebody else or, a tech in your lab, and they can repeat it as well. It can't be magic sauce. And then once you have those elements together, IP, very repeatable, excellent technology, and then a team of industry expertise, then I think you're in a good place to launch out.
One thing I recommend to entrepreneurs is that they go out and interview a couple of different lawyers, a couple of different IP attorneys. You're going to be spending money. That's money that's going out of your pocket into theirs, and you don't have that much in your, so you need to be really comfortable with them. How have you found those resources? What have been your most successful ways of finding some of those attorneys, IP counsel, general counsel, scientific advisors, those people that are early on that really are critical to adding value, but also to advising you? What ways have you found? How do you go out and find those people if you're not personally connected to them?
Yeah, I think all three of us are going to have a different approach to us. And Maria, in case you don't remember, you actually referred our IP attorney to us. So, that's, I think all of our successful consultants are ones that we got through a personal referral network of other people that previously had successful companies, or people that had worked with those IP attorneys and those industry advisors. Every time I worked with a consultant that came and approached us, or who was a general consultant, I found that they were not a perfect fit for what we needed, and that it always came through a referral. And every referral I had, the person was often like, "I'm so busy, can we have a meeting in a month?" Those types of people are really booked up, and you just kind of have to bang on their door and tell them about why your venture is so exciting and get them to work on you. You always want to be working with really busy consultants who are, in the life every single day.
And if you're taking appointments with founders and they come to talk to you and they're saying, well, I'm going to be adding to my advisory board, do you as funders also make connections and recommendations? And how do you decide how to recommend people to others?
I can start. Yes is the answer. And again, we fund really early stage startups. Many are being spun out of academic or healthcare settings. Many times they're first time founders, entrepreneurs. And so I think that advisory board is actually very critical. And so we're looking to populate that advisory board very early on and kind of amplify the power of the founding team. And so, we're out there in our network trying to find the right folks. But the technology is very unique, right? And so it depends on the particular domain. And there's a good chance that our internal team doesn't even have experience in that area. So you got to reach out further, but you're also leveraging the founders themselves. So, Mark and Gibbon, his co-founder, have their networks, but you're trying to grab those people, pull them in, validate whether they're going to add value. And we've had situations where we add them as an advisory board member or a consultant, and sometimes they end up as both. And so, I think KayoThera did a really good job adding to that team and including talent that wasn't just at the stage of where their current development was. And maybe Mark will comment on this, but they even got clinical advisory members on early on, which were giving them kind of over the horizon viewpoint, but it kind of cycles back to the preclinical work they were doing. So I think they did a great job of adding to that advisory board.
Go ahead, Merika.
Oh, just on advisory boards, I think you want to have people that are going to have add value and advocate for your company. And the last thing you want is to add someone that has a big name and looks great, but is not going to speak highly of your company. They don't know what you're doing. They're impossible to schedule. Some kind of those realistic things like that. Because if we call up an advisory board and we go, "Hey, what do you think of this company that you're the board of?" and they don't know anything about it, they can't talk about it, they can't speak to the accolades, then that's not someone you want to have on your board. So make sure that there are people who will add value. They're going to be there with you, and you can work with them.
That's great. Yeah.
Do you mind if I just raise up to this question a little bit too, where we talked about what Mark was describing, I think is what I call the hard pitch. Like, I have a particular amount of funding I'm looking to raise, and I'm looking to raise it now, and I'm out. But I think one of the things if you know the timing of when you need to close that capital, or hopefully if you have some lead time, and especially I think in life sciences where the development timeline is decent, if you can get out there early before you absolutely need that capital and start to network with the potential investors and your partners and get on their radar that what you're doing and talk about what your development plan looks like. And, getting warm introductions is, I think, one of the best ways to get to potential funding sources. But I think doing that soft pitch outreach and getting on the radar is a way for you to generate your own warm introduction. And, venture capital funds want to pay attention to groups that execute. And so if you're saying, I'm going to, over the next quarter, do these 3 milestones, and then you do them and you come back to them and say, hey, I completed them, they're going to track the company and they're going to say, this is a team that we should really pay attention to. And then when you're ready to make that hard pitch, you're going to have that relationship. They're going to know what you're doing. They're familiar with your technology. And so that's a nice way to, I think, get on folks' radar. But you need a little bit of a luxury of a runway or time before you absolutely need that capital.
And speaking practically, let's say I'm thinking I'm going to need to raise funds. So I want to come talk to some funders, but I'm not going to pitch them, but I want to talk to them. How do I approach them? What do I say to them that makes them say yes to me for just an interview to tell them what I'm doing?
I'll let Merika respond to this one, see if I'm going to be right on it. But I think when you go to these pitch events, at least this is my strategy, is these folks are getting pitched all day or for multiple days, and it just rapid fire. And so I'm usually kind of get in, do the elevator pitch, get the contact information, and then follow up with them. But the other thing is, if it's the soft pitch modality and you're like, I'm not looking to raise capital, the force field already drops, right? Because now they know I'm not going to be hard pitched in the next 30 seconds. And so it can become a little bit more of a conversation. So, you got to go out there, like you said, get out of the office and make the contacts, approach people at networking events, but think about what that approach is going to be like, right? Are you bringing the hard pitch? You got that elevator pitch ready? You're ready for that, conversation. Or is it really just bringing them up to speed on the opportunity? But again, I'd be interested to see if how Merika likes to get pitches brought to her attention.
Yeah, I mean, we love warm introductions. If it comes from a friend or family, you look at that closely. I would say things that just kind of get randomly submitted. I know every VC has kind of their submit at vc.com. Those tend to not get looked at very, very much. So if you have an intro into a VC, that's always really helpful. I find sometimes, people have reached out to me on LinkedIn. Actually, I reached out to Mark on LinkedIn. I had seen KayoThera for Startup Stadium. I was like, this is interesting, and reached out to him. So, I'm not saying go ping everyone on LinkedIn and spread everything around. But if wanting to talk, I have this thing, I'm curious to hear your thoughts, that always helps. I know sometimes the stage that people are at in their careers, people tend to be more willing to give advice. So I feel like if you're a grad student or a postdoc, there's a lot of people who are like, I'll take 30 minutes to talk to you about what you have going on and what you're thinking. So you kind of have an advantage there. Mark, I'm curious from your standpoint, how did you get so many warm intros to VCs?
Yeah. So we worked in a space that was interesting, where a lot of large pharma had tried to work in it previously. So what happened is every once in a while, we'd find one of these people that was in one of those programs, and they were really interested to see if somebody had gone back and tried to crack it. And so we picked up a couple that way. I also went through like a lot of my old college roommates, people that I met through Princeton. There's a huge network that is Princeton adjacent, where you're always usually 1 degree away from getting an introduction to the person that you want to meet. And so it was really, all of the above. It was, I didn't take the same route for any of the VCs we spoke with. And some of those ones that we initially pitched to, they're still warm. I still interact with them now. I give them unprompted updates. And like Mike said, I'm not asking them for money right now. I'm just letting them know that things are going really well, and that, maybe in another year we'll be looking for money because we have such great technology.
I want to make sure that there's a few questions that we definitely get in. So I'm going to jump a little bit. I want to talk about how we're talking about talking to a lot of people. So you're connecting this person, you're connecting that person, you're talking to this person, you're following up with that person. How do you remember who you've said what to and what deck you've sent? Because typically your deck evolves. So how do you manage that big, huge pile of people that you've spoken to?
Yeah, I think I had a good system for this. So you have your main pitch deck that you send around to people, as well as some peripheral materials. What I would do is every time I sent that to somebody by email, I would turn it into a PDF and I would watermark it with the name of that company that I was sending it to. And that served 2 purposes. One, I would send it into a folder that was all my previous presentations with their name on it, so I could always go back and see what I sent to them. The other thing is, if that deck ever gets shared down the road with somebody else that you didn't intend it to, you're going to see where that watermark wound up. So there's 2 different, benefits of doing it that way. And then what I then do is I just had a Excel spreadsheet. That spreadsheet I put together with a friendly investor who wasn't interested in investing in KayoThera. We weren't the right fit, but they knew all of the other VCs. And so they went through and prioritized about 90 different VCs for us. And then I put them into, first priority, second priority, third priority. And then I would have the person that introduced me to them, the person I first spoke with. If I had a second meeting, who was at that second meeting. And then I just did green, red, yellow at the end of that meeting to know what type of temperature they had and what the major comments were. So you just track that in Excel, share it with the team, share it with our consultants. And if the consultants had intros to any of these other groups, they would see that as it evolved, and then they would, offer those introductions. And I think that Merika and Mike can speak to this. Pretty much all the VCs know each other. So I'll pass that over to you guys.
Yeah, I would think of your kind of non-con pitch deck as your calling card. So you definitely want to, when you're reaching out to people, share that, openly. And speaking from, kind of the VC standpoint, we see so many technologies all the time. And so we do not want to sign a CDA unless we are very interested in a company. And we often don't know that until after we've talked to them, maybe had some questions. So you always want to have non-con information you can share that, they can pass around internally, and you can specify, please don't share this outside, things like that is fine. But, to us, it's a red flag if you see people are like, well, I need an NDA to even tell you what I'm doing. That shows that maybe you're not as protected in your position as you think you are. So try not to force everyone to sign an NDA from the get-go. Work with a non-con, and then, as diligence goes, you can get to that CDA part. But
yeah, I think both comments are on point, and trying to pull a thread that Mark raised. I mean, really, this is a process, and Mark's and Merika are taking you through it. But I don't know if Mark will react to this, but maybe you can share with folks like how time consuming this is for founders, and the fact that if you don't have a process, you're still going to have to do it. You're just going to spend a lot more time doing it inefficiently. So I know, Mark, you clearly did have a process and we're diligent about that, but can you maybe just describe the overall process, how much time you spend as a founder, trying to raise capital?
Yeah, it's another full-time job. So when you're financing and going out for it, you need to be running an R&D program that integrates the comments you get during financing. Then you need to be doing the financing as well, and always critically looking at your stuff, your data, your lawyers, whatever else, and being really ready to respond to any questions and get that turned around within a day, 2 days, no more than 3 days when you get questions that come back to you. When the iron's hot, you need to strike on it. So I think that's another part about, when are you ready to finance? It's when you're also ready to have a whole nother 40-hour work week that goes specifically into raising money. And that's going to be critical. If you don't have that time, you have to find that time. You can't farm out the financing. There are lots of consultants or businesses and other type of people that say, hey, we'll go out and try to find you leads and bring them in, not to be disparaging, but there's, big groups like startups.com and others where they try to offer you this integrated type of package. But it's got to be you, ultimately the investment's going to be in you. You're going to be the front person that's interacting with the funders. They're going to want to see that relationship evolve and see how you work with them and work in response to criticism and everything else. So the founder, the CEO, the CTO, CSOs, they've got their foot forward, and you need to be ready for a huge time commitment. And it's not short either. It's 3 months minimum, more like a year is what's realistic. But the benefit is on the backside is if you make enough warm introductions, not everybody's ready to offer you a lead term sheet, but many VCs are happy to syndicate and not be a lead investor. So then you sort of get this benefit of having many interested parties, and then it's easier for the lead investor to make that leap as well.
And then I just wanted to mention, because I think Merika and Mark focused on the pitch deck, but the term I use are artifacts. When you're getting ready to fundraise, I think there's a kind of series of documents that you're going to need, and both in the soft pitch mode, but definitely in the hard pitch mode. If you're successful, in other words, if you break through and they say yes, then it's going to be rapid fire. They're going to start pulling that thread. And if you aren't ready, that doesn't look good. And I'd be interested to get Merika's comments on when that due diligence process starts. you can pretty much tell if people are scrambling. So you should have your act together before you kind of make that outreach. And so Mark mentioned the pitch deck, but I'll maybe rattle a few off, and then Mark and Merika can react to it, and they may add to it or knock me down here. But I would say definitely the pitch deck, but also that 30-second elevator pitch for when you're in rooms like this, when you just get in front of somebody. I'd also say like a 2-page executive summary, which is a bit of a pivot off of a actual slide deck. And then this is kind of old school, but I still like business plans. And even if it's just for internal consumption, as those words hit that page, they have to mean something to you. And that's a good way to validate that you're on the right path. But I think what's replaced it these days is really just a more detailed slide deck, which, as Merika said, they might not be willing or may be willing to sign an NDA, depending on what you're putting in there. You'll have to decide, hey, can I go non-confidential with this detailed slide deck? Or am I going to require an NDA to put my data in there? You'll have to make a judgment call on that. And then I think the data itself in the slide deck, you'll have to determine how to handle that, whether it's a portion of it in there just as a teaser. And this is maybe a topic Mark can comment on, but we find that a lot of times some of the founders like to put a lot of data in the slide deck and then miss some critical components on the business side. So I would just urge you to try to get a balance there and maybe use the appendix to jack it up on the data side. But I just wanted to not lose track that the process that Mark was talking about includes more than just a slide deck. And if you have an organization structure around managing all this documentation and delivering it, it's going to go a lot more efficiently. But I know Merika, Mark, if you have any comments on these other artifacts or the type of information the founder should have prepared when they reach out to Accelerator or other VCs.
Yeah, so once we kind of had that initial conversation and non-con, and maybe we've asked some questions and we're interested in learning more, we usually will then sign a CDA or an NDA. And at that point, what we kind of expect to see is, a non-con or a confidential deck that has a lot of the data, the things you couldn't share before, and then also a data room that then would have all of the data files that back up the data that's in that presentation. We would expect to see things in there, such as publications, just for good references. We would expect to see any IP, any published. We don't want to see chemistry. I don't know, that's maybe unique to us, but we like to not see chemistry. So every VC might have different things that they ask you not to show them. But we do like to see the science. We also like to look at agreements. So if you have consulting agreements with people, work orders, MSAs, anything, the license from the university, anything that kind of would materially impact the company, we like to see that as well. And often, sometimes down the line, we'll get into more of the financing stuff. So have you raised money? What does your cap table look like? Things like that. So those are all things that you should have ready to go in the data room. And you might, depending on what they ask for, you can share them at different times, but you want to have it ready.
Yeah, I would say this is one that Mike always asked me to put together a business plan. Now I was next week. I never wound up putting that together. The big one as well, to Merika's point, is in the agreements. So if you start the process by looking at the end, the very last thing you're going to do during any financing is sign all these representations and warrants that everything that you said was true and that there weren't any gaps in employee assignment clauses, or that you didn't, like indemnify somebody who's absolutely crazy. So those are areas that you want to get in front of as well. And the other thing, as simple as it sounds, you should have a template for the NDA even before you go out fundraising. You should have a template for all of your documents so that it's easy, so that you look professional, right? In some of the other lectures that I give, you can only lose your reputation once. You can never get it back. So you want to look like you're professional. These are all resources that Princeton has, that NJHS has, and then other founders are more than happy to share their document templates with them to make sure you don't have gaps in assignment or indemnification or any of those other things. Many agreements you can go back and change during the financing, but they need to be in a somewhat good place to start out with.
And Mark, Merika mentioned it, and I think you had a data room established pretty early on, a proprietary system. And then I think just Merika also just ran down, for folks who didn't really hear what all the items, she basically just went down the entire due diligence list that VCs look for. And the two things kind of marry up to each other. They're going to have a request through this due diligence list process, and you can Google that and they'll pop out on the internet. But then there's a repository, the data room or due diligence binder. And so I think, I don't know, Mark, I don't recall the firm you use, but I know Carta, I think, offers one. Dropbox has a service like that. You could start in Google Drive if you want, just to organize your documentation. But I didn't want to run past that because, you know, firms are going to make a formal request for all this information. If you're not organized, that's when, you know, and I've been there where I get a series of one email after the other. And then people ask you, how long is it going to take to close this round? Well, you know, if you keep firing one email at a time, it's probably going to take a while. So I don't know, Mark, if you want to comment on what you used and how efficient it was.
Yeah, we used Google Drive for everything to organize our internal work. You can't use that as an external facing data room. Now we use Ignite. In both cases, what we'll do is transition over to something that's a more professional data room. So originally we used OneHub. It tells you when somebody's viewing something, when somebody downloads it, and gives you a full history of file views and you know, what they've accessed, what they've downloaded. And then the other nice thing about a good professional data room is you can graduate people at different rates. So if there's one firm looking at your top level diligence and they're ready to go to the next level, then you give them access to, say, your IP folder and your, you know, really core secrets. And then if they're good at that, then you take them to your third data room, which is your financing docs, your cap tables, your licenses, and everything else like that. So you want to be able to control different people at different points in the process and graduate them from one area to another.
I'd like to ask a question about how to think strategically about who to reach out to for funding. So let's say that you are going to go for VC funding. Let's say you are going to go for, I don't know, $10 million, $15 million pre-seed or seed, whatever. How do you figure out who, what funders that might be interested in your type of technology and that size of a round in your state and your, you know, how do you go about and find the, and then how do you prioritize out of that list of 40? How do you prioritize who you should reach out to first? Who's the most likely, maybe who's the least risky? So you should start there. I don't know, but who could be a lead, who could be a follow? How do you manage that list of who to reach to, and how do you grow that as you grow your process?
Oh, maybe I'll start. I think one important thing is to make sure that you know how much you actually need to raise. So a lot of this goes into what your development plan is for your technology and then your budget. And a personal pet peeve of mine is when someone will pitch to us and they'll go, oh, you know, we want to raise 10 million because that gives us 2 years of runway. And I go, okay, but what are you going to get at the end of 2 years? And they're like, well, it's 2 years and we'll be further along before we have to raise. So no, like you want to pick a number and have your development plan go where it's adding to a real value inflection point for your company. And that's the right number to raise. So don't go out with a rate, you know, oh, we're looking 5 to 10. We'll see how much we get. It's not a good approach. So once you know, okay, we need X amount, then you want to go and look at VCs that invest, you know, at your stage and in those amounts. So, you know, you don't want to go to some of these players who are, you know, later, they're Series C, Series D, they're looking for that. Don't waste your time there. So you want, you know, early stage seed, Series A, do that sort of investment and look to see, you know, will they lead, will they not? And a lot of that is kind of, I guess, you know, if you're in the know, you know who does that. But if you talk to other founders or other groups of, you know, oh, who did you get to lead your round? And sometimes even in press releases, they'll say like this round was led by so-and-so with, you know, additional investors. So it's a lot of kind of this sleuthing to see, you know, who leads, what types of deals, who do they work with that they might partner with, and what type of, you know, I guess it's overall money size are they putting in?
For me, I'd say the best financing that you can find is the person that's going to write the check for you. So, you know, you can be, if you're George Church and you have the next best thing, you can go out and you can have just one number and it's gonna land somewhere around that. What I'd say is if you want to have really broad coverage, have a development plan for what $1 to $2 million gets you. And then when you're speaking to somebody that only writes a check for $1 to $2 million, say, hey, this is 6 months, it gets us to this inflection point, and then we can bring in this financing. If it's a $10 million company, you need to have an idea of, inflection points that replicate that. And, likewise, if you're going for a huge $40 to $50 million play, you need to have a platform that justifies that investment size such that, you're not going to have a down round in another 2 years because you didn't take anything to near clinic or near commercialization. So I know who you're targeting, cast a broad net, but make sure that before you go into the meeting, you're not speaking two different languages about the financing. And you'll very much get that idea from PitchBook, from public sources about what size they come in on. And then the other side to that is, if you're talking to a strategic venture group, it needs to align with the focus of that parent pharma company or that parent company, and they're very slow. If you're talking to a VC group and they're a platform group, you can't pitch a single asset. So we had crossed off all of our single asset or all of the platform groups like Arch or Third Rock because it would just never land there. So your company needs to fit into what they've done previously, but it can't be exactly the same as what they've done previously either, because then you're going to give up a lot of competitive intelligence and probably not get an investment. So it's a delicate dance.
No wonder it takes a full-time job, because there's so many different aspects to do it well thought through, well organized, well managed, the information collected and presented well. There's a lot of different components that take a lot of time to manage, never mind to reach out and talk to people. So no wonder you say that it's a full-time. I'd say that's not a 40-hour a week. A 40-hour week is probably a half-time job these days for you. I want to open up to the audience, both online as well as in person. I have a lot of other questions, but let's start here.
Oh, great. This has been very helpful, very interesting. Your comments about NDAs makes me crazy with NDAs, but that was helpful because you never know when to do that. You don't want to be too soon or too late because it's your IP and somebody else might end up with your IP. But my question is about the advisory board. So I'd like you to talk about how you approach those people that you'd love to have as an advisor. What are you really looking for them to do? And more importantly, what is your pitch to them as to what's in it for them?
Great question. Who'd like to take a first stab at it? Mark?
Sure. So the way that we did it was we had people through my PI through Gibbon had a really great number of contacts who were at the bleeding edge of science. And so they offered both sort of reputation to the company. They were interested in a company that was trying to solve problems that they'd been interested in for a while. So I think if you have an advisory board that through their CV, through their pedigree, that they have been interested in a similar problem forever, they're going to love sitting in on this company and understanding how this company is finally, making the best mousetrap. And when you get those people who are aligned there, that I think is your most exciting advisory board. I think people that start out the conversation and they're talking about the equity and pay that they're going to be getting as the first 10 minutes that you're chatting, that's a tough person to put on your advisory board. So if they're not committing 2 to 3 hours of free time to really understand the company and they're not enthusiastic about it, I'd say that's your first filter. And I'll pass it over to Merika.
Well, I just had a kind of follow-up question to you, Mark, on that. Do you find that, you approach people specifically about KayoThera and your company and what you wanted to do, or more like, hey, I'm interested in meeting you and this space, I want to learn more of your approach, things like that, as like an intro?
Yeah, I'd say I sort of play to people's ego, right? Because you want their help, and in a way you're kind of helping them out as well. I approach them and say, hey, we're doing this KayoThera thing. Here's the problem we're trying to solve. We need your expertise and think you would really drive value at the company. And that way, that person, you want to feel needed as an advisory board member or consultant as well. You don't just want people using your name. You want to be giving back to the company. So that was how I always went. And that was always a very warm reception.
No compensation. There's no compensation. You're not offering them anything, no stipends, nothing like that.
Oh, yeah. We offered compensation, but in most cases that was People have an idea of what they want as an hourly wage. That was never the first conversation.
Okay.
I think that many people understand that naturally follows, but it's not the principal reason for that partnership, right?
And what would you
So-
say is the optimal number of people to have on an advisory board?
It's so that it covers your blind spots. If you're very good at something and you don't need to hire in redundant people there. For me in particular, it was a lack of legal and business expertise as well as clinical. I had no expertise in any of those realms. So actually most of our first people that we brought in sort of had more experience in the business of pharma and in the clinical ideas there. And so I tried to cover the things I didn't know about.
We'll get another question. Yeah. And Neil, if there's questions from the online audience, let us know also.
We all know there's a big list of what VCs and startup and angel investors are looking for in a company, and they could check it off. Two-part question. What is like the real critical thing that you can look at and know if this team is going to be successful? Is question one. And question two is there's a common belief that it's if the team can pivot correctly and if the team can pivot appropriately, there's a best chance that they're going to be successful. It's a common thought. Not everybody agrees with that. But for the team to pivot, how do you know when you should pivot and when you shouldn't?
So I don't know if we should break that into the two questions or take that together. One is how to find the right jockey. And one is if you're the jockey, how to know if you need to course correct. I think that's, yeah.
Mike, you want to start?
I'll take the jockey because I think people in this business talk about the horse of the jockey, and I could tell you now it's the jockey. The teams can find a way. I think they're really talented teams, but it's tough in the early stage because you have maybe one or two people. In case of KayoThera, Mark was taking on the majority of the day-to-day responsibility from day one. So that's a lot to put on one person's shoulders, and they don't have many times all the experience. So you're almost kind of relying also on Mark and the extended team and their judgment to add the appropriate team members after that. And one, I didn't comment on it, but I don't know if Mark will add or respond to it. But one thing I liked about the KayoThera advisory board too is the chemistry that they have among each other. And that's really important. But I think that also gets dictated by the founders, right? So, the A team members bring other A team members to the table. I don't know if I'm getting exactly at your first question. The pivot, I'll probably punt that because that's probably the harder question.
The one thing I want to add about the jockey is, Mark, when you first started out, you were like a sponge. You went to things and you're like, I want to learn. I am here to listen and learn and talk, and you were sucking it all in. And I think that's a really critical factor on somebody who's going to do well. He didn't know, he hadn't done it before, but being open to saying, I don't know, I'm learning, and spending a lot of time learning is critical.
I'll take that and amplify it in the relation to the pivot, because that one of the reasons we're even doing this event is I feel like the founders, it's a very difficult job. And you have all these constituencies to try to meet expectations around, including investors, other stakeholders, customers, patients, and this information is coming at you from all sides, and you're on this razor's edge of making the correct decision. And that includes related to the pivot. And so it's really these thoughtful people like Mark who are taking in and really listening. And you can tell it, you hear the word coachable. That's a huge one, I think, for investors, because that means they're at least listening. That doesn't mean they're going to agree with you all the time, but it's walking that razor's edge, taking in that advice, and then making a thoughtful, informed decision, whether it's a pivot, a hire, and that's a talent that I think unique founders have, that they can assimilate all that information and make the right decision more times than the wrong decision.
Does anybody have an opinion on how far along a startup needs to be before they should get funded? For example, Should they have raised friends and family around to show that there's trust? Should they have some NIH, NSF grants to show that there's some scientific credibility? Should they build some prototypes? I could go on, but I'm
I
just
think it
curious.
depends on everything. I think the answer sort of is, I'll let you guys talk to it, but it depends on what industry, it depends on where you're going, what, you know, how much you're gonna need for it, if you're money intensive or not, you know. So
I'll let maybe Merika or Mark, if you want to respond.
Yeah, I mean, I would say for us, the science trumps everything. So it needs to be at a stage where you understand the biology or whatever, you understand what you're doing. It's well validated. There's a clear path forward. It's no longer this kind of fishing, you know, whatever it is, it's fishing expedition. The science has to be strong. It has to be novel. It needs to be cutting edge, and that this financing is coming at the right time to move things forward. You know, we don't have a requirement that you had to have raised an angel or friends and family. You know, often we do therapeutics, so that doesn't get you far. You can't bootstrap a therapeutic. So that's not something we look for. Grant money is great. It's slow. It takes a lot of time. It's not a lot of money to move the needle sometimes. So, you know, we don't have that as a gating requirement at all, but you know, sometimes that can be what you need to kind of validate the science to be ready. So I think you know, you need to be at the point where you can stand behind whatever you're trying to sell and be like, we understand this and we just need to run this development path forward to take it.
and from the founder side, it's non-dilutive, which is, you know, something to consider. I do want to ask a Zoom audience question. How do we handle the no thank you response from the investors? This is a conversation. This is a point that we have talked about repeatedly, and that this is a question that is going to come up in future sessions as well. But since it's come up, let's talk about it. So you reach out to somebody, you say, either here's my pitch deck, or I just want to talk. No, thanks. You're not in my, you know, I'm not really interested. What do you do?
I'll you know, say first to round it out, due diligence starts at hello. So, you know, when you're initiating that conversation, just make sure it's professional. And on the other end, if it turns out that it is a no, and it could be more than just that passing pitch. I had a particular portfolio company that was fantastic at dealing with these kinds of situations. And I was in a, you know, recognized VC fund. It was great that they got in there. They had a great demo. And it was a pass. It was a no, which, by the way, was a great thing from the VC. He's not going to spin them around. He just was straightforward, respectful. It's just going to be a pass for us. And as opposed to like sulking and slamming the door and get out of there, they probed him why it's a pass. Does he have any recommendations on the product itself? Can you put me in touch with any customers or any strategic partners? And I think he made 3 product recommendations. He put them in touch with 2 partners and at least 1 paying customer. And it turned out that, I'll just say, someone that was otherwise affiliated with the fund, but not within the fund, ultimately ended up making a personal investment in the company. And so if they would have slammed the door and walked out, that would have never happened. So I've seen it happen in a very positive sense. If you can, you know, handle it professionally and probe, try to figure out why, and then ask if they're going to, you know, will they pass you down the line to someone else? Maybe it just doesn't hit their investment thesis correctly. And then if it goes the other way, I've seen that too. And then the word gets out that, you know, they're hard to work with or this or that. So just be really cautious and just trying to mine value out of every interaction that you have.
There's one other Zoom question from Eugene. Hi, Eugene. It is going to be recorded and available. You didn't ask that question, but you usually do. What is the appropriate compensation for advisory board members? Oh, Mark, you already answered it in chat, but
yeah, I did.
You'd like to answer it out loud.
Yeah, I think some of the time you'll find ones who are interested in participating for free, which actually poses an issue if they ever give you any IP, because you have to pay for IP to get it. So you need to pay somebody at least $1. I think if somebody's previously in the industry, they're going to charge normally $400, $500 an hour, depending on how many hours they're being engaged. Some of the time it's a little easier to just pay someone, say $2,000 quarterly, and then you just get email answers with them and you get to bounce things back and forth off of them. The ones who are really expensive are lawyers and clinicians. Anybody that has a professional title Those people are often so busy that, in order to be fair, you need to be paying $1,000 an hour or so. So they can get expensive, and you want to be very judicious with your time with them.
But also just be careful not to give out equity to kind of everyone that you want to have help your company. If you can, try to pay by the hour, keep your cap table clean, and just kind of remove some complexity down the line.
Right. They have to be giving value for you to give them something, some equity, right? A final question from the, a final two, quick. Ed.
Nice to see you.
You too.
Hi, I'm Ed Saliga. I'm co-owner of Advanced Solar Products, so practitioner to some extent. We talked about how we go forward once we have the number. We had $2 million. Here's, get your advisory board, kick it around, and here are the sources. But I'd like to hear more about how do you arrive at the number? Because what happens after that can be very different based on a different number. So I'm just curious about what your process looks like, time frame, anything that provides any guidance with that.
It's a tough question. It's what are you willing to take for what you have at that point? And, if the alternative is the company falling over flat, how low would you go to not have that alternative happen? It's always going to be a conversation. I think for very successful or venturable ideas, that valuation upfront isn't as important as what the payout looks like down the road. And so Merika's dealt with this many more times than I have. I think that she's got the best insight here.
Yeah, I think part of it is knowing what is a little bit market rate. I think we've seen recently some Series A's that are 50 million, and that tends to be, very different than if you're kind of looking at a smaller raise. So I think, you want to look at where the value inflection points. And in therapeutics, there's certain kind of key milestones you want to hit for med tech devices, the same diagnostics. So you want to be, planning out how you get to those key points and what it's going to take so that you can ask for the right amount of money. So it'll depend very much based on the industry, but that's kind of where you're talking to people and seeing where deals maybe happen, at which stages can help.
Have you seen the tightening market changing not valuations, but changing the amount that people are coming in asking for that are raising?
I've seen it both ways. I've seen people who want to raise more because they're worried it's going to be harder to raise later. And then you also see people who are looking to raise less because they think that, they might not get more. So it all depends. I think sometimes if you're picking the right value inflection point, then the number is what the number is. And I would just encourage people to think creatively about how you arrive at that number. I think a lot of people think they have to have, employees and build a lab and kind of have a big presence. And I think, we work successfully with a lot of companies like KayoThera that have this virtual model working with consultants and CROs and maybe having one key person in charge. So just kind of think about how much it really costs to do what you need to do.
That's great. Thanks.
And we had one other question. And then one last one. I can't resist.
This is all well and good, Mark, Merika, and Mike. But one of the things that's really important that we often overlook is the marketing aspects. And this was a surprise to us with our company. We interviewed like 30 different PR digital marketing companies. It was really hard to decide which one to go with because we didn't want someone just to do the job. We wanted them to really help us perhaps do the kind of things that an advisory board would do, introductions and that sort of thing. We picked a great company to work with. And I would like to know what you think about digital marketing and picking the right company, because if you pick the wrong one, it could be detrimental. If you got to pick the right one, any insight that you could give us on your thoughts on picking the right digital marketing PR type firm?
It's out of my ballpark. Merika, do you have experience, or Mike?
Out of his ballpark, but he's passing it, he's punting it to Mike or Merika.
So I own a branding and marketing agency, and we specialize in biotech, healthcare, and pharma, and finance. So we have a lot of connections to bridge the gap between the two. So finding an agency that specializes in what you do, the pitch decks, knowing how to speak to the venture cap companies that we just spoke to yesterday, and they tell us, what they were looking to invest in. One says, they want to be more commercial versus a startup. And then some have a startup, some have ESG. So it's basically finding the right agency that has the alignment for you.
That has the alignment with what you're looking to do yourself.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Stephen, last question.
Yeah, great, great session. I've got a lot out of this. So I was wondering if the panel could talk about differences in raising and approaching investors when you're going to approach angels rather than VCs.
Yeah, so a difference between approaching an angel versus a VC, and can you approach both at the same time? Yeah. Mark, did you talk to any angels?
Yep. So angels typically have a hard time with therapeutics because the path to a sale is quite long. A path to success is really long, and it's very fraught with failure. So when you think about who you're pitching to, it's the jobs of VCs to diversify their portfolio across many different plays so that, essentially many different single plays add up to a good diversified portfolio where they can have a return there. When you're going to angels, I think it makes a little bit more sense if you have an earlier licensing model or you have a model that's going to generate revenue a little bit earlier. So that even if the company fails or only goes horizontal, they'll still have a chance of recouping some of their investment because they might only be making 1 or 2 investments a year. So you need to have an exit strategy that works either for angels or for VCs. And then strategics are sort of your third area where they're not as concerned about the exit because they're going to try to send it into their company. So if it's an Apple there or Facebook or Google, they're going to be looking to acquire that. So it's an entirely different metric there, and it needs to be parallel to what they're developing, or if it's pharma, same thing. So you've got 3 different business models there. It's all about the returns and the path to that return, how that fits each of those 3 different investors. And obviously the government, doesn't, or grants, they don't need any return out of it. So that's sort of outside the conversation.
And Merika and Mike, do you co-invest with angels?
We tend to, I guess, since we're often creating the companies, we're putting the money in first, so there kind of hasn't been an opportunity for angels. It's not, if an angel round has happened, that's not a problem at all. I think angel rounds can be great if you have a specific thing that you're hoping to get out of them. So if there's some key data that you need to generate that will now convince, say, a larger VC to put money in, that's a great use of funds for kind of an angel to kind of bridge you through that valley of death. I think you want to be careful to not just get angel money and then try to figure out what you're going to do with it. So, use it strategically and maybe as a bridge if you are going to have to get, venture rounds later.
I'm afraid we're going to end the questions. Both we have some online and some in person. Sorry about that. The great news is you've got a lot of questions. We are going to have a 4-part series. I want to talk about some upcoming events. Biolabs has an upcoming event, March 14th, about core research facilities, 5 p.m. here. It's in collaboration with Rutgers, with the NJEDA, with Princeton, and a couple of others. So if you can make that, register through Eventbrite at the Innovation Center here. The Entrepreneurship Council has a number of events. We've got Tiger Talks in the City. That's going to be in person in New York, but also virtual. Innovations in Arts Accessibility. That's on March 30th. We've got another Tiger Talks in the City, Innovations in Materials Science. That's April 13th. That's both in person in New York and virtual. We have our upcoming Empower Conference. It's celebrating women academic entrepreneurs this year. Everyone is welcome to attend. 3 days virtual. Our pitch session will be in person for those that are selected to pitch in New York City, though it will be virtual for the rest. Unfortunately, that just closed on Friday. We got some great applications coming in, so sorry for those who missed it. Storytelling workshop, Elevating Your Pitch. We're going to do May 10th in New York City. That's an in-person only event. And these are open to everybody. It's not just for Princeton. Princeton Research Day is on May 11, and that is open to everybody to come and see all the amazing stuff that's going on campus. And we have our reunions conference happening on May 26th. Again, open to everybody. Our next in the journey of the entrepreneur series is going to be around developing a strong fundraising pitch deck and continuing the discussion on the fundraising process. And that is going to be on Tuesday, April 11th here, starting at 5:30. Since you came to this, you'll be on the email list, so you'll get information about that, but put that into your calendars. And a huge thank you to Mike for really pushing to make this happen. And for Mark for being sort of the entrepreneur that we're following along the journey, and for all of the work that you did to organize it and being willing to talk about it. And Merika for joining us in from the West Coast as another of the funders that is investing in the early life sciences. So thank you, and the audience. Thank you very much for coming.